some things.
Oh, the colour.
If you were going to prepare things for WEA and they don't want you, can we have you?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes, good idea.
Okay. So red, as we've just said, is a colour with a lot of different symbolic meanings through time and always has been, you know, for anger, also for love and passion, lots of different things. It's the first colour that gets a name in almost every culture after having two words that roughly mean dark things and light things. The next thing that stands out as different is red. Sorry. And that's because of berries. It's also because of blood. A lot of Hebrew goes back to very early word origins. And in Hebrew, the word for blood and for red are very, very similar words. They come from the same place. The earliest thing that is being used as a pigment, as far as we know, is red ochre. And that is being used by the Neanderthals. We reckon the earliest things that have been found, probably 250,000 years ago, that's pre-Neanderthal even, right back into early hominids, grab hold of this red rock and rub it on things, and you can mark your surface. And isn't that fun? So the earliest pigments, the earliest sort of face decoration. Why am I getting an option of leaving them? Go away. Why do I want to cancel? What's that doing? Go away. Sorry, I've got a weird Zoom. I think maybe it's trying to log me in twice. I think I can just ignore that. There we go. Yeah, this here has been interpreted as various things. It's one of the earliest things we know that has these sort of markings on it. It's been suggested that it is a stick that is meant to be held in the hand for, basically it's a crayon, for marking surfaces, possibly for marking yourself. That you can, it's been described as a lipstick, as a because red ochre works as a sunblock, it'll work as an insect repellent, it's even slightly antiseptic. So cover yourself in red ochre. In the African heat, you're probably doing yourself a favour. And of course, it turns up in the most, the common pigment, apart from maybe black, in all of the cave paintings. So these are sort of 20,000 years old, something like that. And it's a good colour for doing your bison. In ancient Egypt, red ochre is used a lot in sort of celebrations of life and victory, and some of the earliest cosmetics in ancient Egypt involved a bit of red ochre. In classical antiquity, it is called Pontus Euxinus, because it comes from a city in the Pontine area, in what is now Turkey, but basically they made very, very good red ochre there, and it was known as Sinope, because Sinope was the city that sent it all out. The Red Lady of Paviland is quite marvellous. I actually know a guy, used to work with a guy who was a farm labourer just here. It's in the wild corner of Wales. And he was one of the first people to see this, because they were excavating it while he was up here with the sheep, as it were. And he went into this cave, says it was absolutely marvellous. Yes, Red Lady of Paviland was discovered by William Buckland, who some of you may dimly remember me mentioning before as the chap that would eat absolutely anything, going from trying out mole to accidentally eating a piece of a French king's fossilized heart. But he was also into his archaeology, and he was alerted to this body being in this cave, and he is working in this is 1823. It's obviously before, as a good Christian, he would say that there is nothing older than the biblical aging of the earth, and that fossils are generally from, it couldn't be older than the flood. And so what he decided this was a Roman era prostitute. And that's why it was all made up and painted, because it's covered, those bones are covered in red ochre. And it had jewellery on, ivory jewellery, which actually is from a mammoth. So he thought, he named this the Red Lady of Paviland. It is in fact male, and it is in fact about 35,000 years old, far pre-Roman, and it is probably a hunter. He's buried with the skull of, I forget which of the big prey animals of the time. But yes, it's a famous example of very early people using red ochre for something really rather dramatic. It wasn't long actually before people were able to make that iron oxide artificially, which seems a little unnecessary because it's one of the commonest ones to just find out there. It's basically rust. But you can control it slightly more carefully. In later times, this is sold as Mars Red. And the planet Mars has obviously been associated with redness for a long time because when you look at it, it is very slightly red. And it turns out they got that exactly right because Mars is covered in iron oxide, although they didn't know that at the time. So when they're calling it Mars Red, they're actually spot on, because it's red ochre either way. There are lots of ways of getting red in the natural world for dyes and for pigments. As well as your red ochre, you can use red lead, you can use madder, you can use vermilion, which is another mineral, mercury sulfide, and you can use Kermes beetles. So we'll come on to some of those. Didn't have to be like a 3-button process to get from there to there. So that's the shades you get from madder.
Nice, yeah.
Which is, yes, it's one of those things we tend to, when people say, oh, they all wore very drab colours in medieval times. Madder is one of the easiest plants to grow for dyeing and one of the easiest to get your pigment from. So a lot of people would have been wearing, if not your sort of first dye batch bright colours, a lot of people in medieval times would have been in these lovely soft sort of salmon pink colours and sort of dusty rose colours. That and bright yellow. Very common colours in the clothing of the time. It's not what people think at all. Yeah, vermilion gets used a lot, which is a really highly toxic chemical. So, I've got some of these in the wrong order. That's what I've got. Do I not even have a picture of that? I might have a picture of that happens later, but there is, sorry, I'm confused with this sentence. Yes, okay. So in India, they are using something called the lac beetle. And if you can turn the lac beetle dye into a pigment, the colour is called lake. And if there are any painters among you, you'll know sometimes colours are called something lake, vermilion lake.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with lakes. It's one that had always puzzled me, but it's the lake is a process, and it's the process that was first used for getting a dye colour to a pigment colour and was first done with lac beetles. It's also indirectly where the word lacquer comes from, and shellac. They're all the same sort of thing. But your vermilion, your cinnabar, is this lovely red, but it is highly toxic, mercuric sulfide. And in prehistoric times, they'd just take this and grind it up to put it on the walls and make this. The earliest known example of it is from Çatalhöyük in Turkey, which is about 10,000 years ago. And it is very favoured by the Romans for these beautiful, bright wall paintings. There is, of course, there's several in Pompeii. Pliny the Younger says that cinnabar costs 15 times more than red ochre and is equal in price to the precious Egyptian blue. But of course, there is a cost to that. It is dug in Roman Spain, but it is one of the places you send prisoners. You send them to work the vermilion mines, and their life expectancy is very, very short. It's basically a death sentence, because they're getting mercuric sulfide, but also they're trying to get at as much mercury in any form and then convert it into pure mercury. So this is not a healthy place to be. Because of that, there is the desire to try and find a way to do it without having to do all that wasting of good slaves. So the Chinese, by the time the Romans are doing all of this, the Chinese have already worked out how to make it an artificial way, but obviously that news does not spread through. But the Arab alchemists work out in sort of the 10th century or so how to make artificial vermilion. And by the Middle Ages, alchemists and some craftspeople know how to do this. It involves messing around with liquid mercury, to be fair, so it's not much better. But yes, if you mix your liquid mercury and your solid sulfur, you can make it for yourself. And that saves on all the lethal cinnabar mining. Technically, that is it's that version that is vermilion. There's loads of different words for red, and technically they do all mean different things, but in practice they mean different color shades. The word vermilion comes from the Latin vermiculum, which means worm colored. Related to vermiculite, is verm. So the verm in vermilion is indeed a verm. This is probably due to a massive confusion by people at the time, because they knew that some red colour came from some insects. And they're right, there's this other red that comes from Kermes beetles. So they were confused, not only thinking that this new artificial thing came from these invertebrates, but also confused about what sort of invertebrates they actually were, and came up with the idea that these were named for worms, despite it being not in the slightest the colour of a worm. So yeah, that's a nice one. There's some good linguistic bits today. So Arabic scholars had said that mercury and sulfur are two of the main base ingredients of all metals. They've sort of got the idea that they're elements, but they have they say that everything is made of mercury, salt, and sulfur, and make them more kind of building blocks of everything. So if you can combine the two, perhaps that is a step on the way towards making gold, because gold is the perfect balance of everything. So that's a step in the right direction, right? So you get a lot of alchemists tinkering around with vermilion, with not good effects for their health, one would have to say. And this stuff was still very expensive, because pure mercury was, so it's still as expensive as gold leaf to buy. So it's only used for, it is occasionally used on illuminated manuscripts, but only for the most important bits. It isn't the red that you see all over the place on them, which we'll come to later. It's used by Titian a lot, and is the most popular red pigment right into the 20th century, although over time it does tend to brown a little bit. But yeah, when you hear tales of 18th, 19th century painters and then going crazy, having licked their brush, one of the things they're doing is eating mercury sulfide. Not good. And because it's a faff to do this combination, because you've got to get hold of liquid mercury, people are still mining for it, even though it's known that mining for it is really dangerous. So the biggest sites in Spain, and this is, after the era of slavery, as far as domestic workers are concerned, in the, say, 16th century, they could not find anyone willing to work there. They could not pay them enough to say, go and work in there. You'll be dead in a year. It's fine. No one would do it. So the bankers who owned these sites appealed to the Spanish crown to supply them with convict labour in 1566. And the King of Spain agreed, as a trial, we'll send you 30 convicts and see how they go. And they treated these workers very well for convicts. They got fed better than most convicts, but there was a 24% death rate per year. And there was a royal inquiry 25 years later saying, oh, are we really just sending them to have a 24% death rate per year? The inquiry did not say that they should stop doing this. What it largely did was they started adding North African slaves to the workforce instead of homegrown convicts. So yes, by 17th century, there are about 60 men working on these mines. They continue to use prisoners, and yeah, the place just does keep running. It's just that the working conditions gradually improve, and they gradually, more ventilation and things like that. And by the late 18th century, they could actually find people who were willing to work there deliberately, by choice, and they get rid of the penal element of it by 1801. So yeah, jobs you do not want to do in history. Number 556, working a vermilion mine. Now, 3 buttons to press. There should be an easy way of doing that. Red lead isn't much better. I have a piece of rock that looks really quite a lot like this. I'm wondering if I've managed to actually get a crystal with some red lead in it. There you go. So yes, red lead is widely used for this, or if you can afford it, you use vermilion for your very fancy bits and then red lead for everything else. It is, again, that China is way ahead of the game on all these things. They synthesize it first, and then Rome does, and you can just roast white lead to get it. White lead is the stuff that's used on everybody's faces. Queen Elizabeth, all the very pale. Yeah, you roast that, you get red lead, so it's not that hard. It's also called minium, and here's another weird linguistic one for you. It is very, very popular with the Mughal artists in the 17th century. That's what this is, I think, as well as having been used by medieval Christian texts for some while before that. But these perfect little Mughal artists, they do very, very small, very intricate pages, and these paintings become known as miniatures, because they are painted with mini as one of their main colours. And this, and then a miniature becomes a small decorative painting. And then something being a mini version comes from that. There is no connection to, say, the word minimum. Mini, as in small, comes from minium red lead.
Well.
Because it is used so much in these little tiny pictures. Isn't that great?
Yes.
It's rather marvellous. So yes, there's a bit of minium red lead. Then, of course, we have, I just say on that one, Van Gogh is a big fan of red lead, which has frustrated many conservators later, because minium over time does whiten under light, and a lot of his paintings don't have their red highlights in them anymore. And that's not something you can sort of clean and fix. It's chemically, it's happened. So what do you do next? There are debates about all of this. Then, of course, we have the wonderful work of the Kermes beetle, which is one of the main dyes, apart from, your native madder is beautiful, but your Kermes is probably a slightly richer colour. Now, Kermes is from, again, not a worm, from a beetle. But although if you go back far enough, the word Kermes is related to the word worm. People seem to have been very, very confused about the species if you go back far enough. But Kermes comes from the dried bodies of this female insect. And it's a lovely place where, again, linguistic, we know exactly when the word Kermes entered the English language, and it entered in 1228. We know that because in 1228, 100 pounds of Kermes dye at that point, so this is the Arabic word, so it's spelled with a Q, Qirmiz, was on a ship which was attacked by a Spanish galleon just off the coast of Sandwich, and all of this Kermes dye came ashore, and it looked like the sea was blood red.
Yeah.
And when people questioned what it actually was, they had to be told, no, it's not blood, it's just Kermes. And that's how the word came into English, because this was obviously news right across the country that the sea near Sandwich had run red with blood. It makes sense. So the colour that Kermes makes is the related word. Lots of subtle shades here. It makes crimson. And crimson, yeah, related word. In Europe, crimson is, and this dye is called grain, because it is, you know, you can see this is tiny seeds. It looks like seeds when it comes across. And to ingrain was to dye something with Kermes. Grain was one of Kermes. So it's nothing to do with grain as in wheat. To ingrain is to dye with Kermes. And Kermes is very colour fast, so it becomes to dye with a colour fast colour. And from there we get the word ingrain. That something is ingrained means it's die fast, it's stuck in you, or stuck in whatever. And again, that's because grain is a word for Kermes. So again, really unexpected. Colour has been so important, you know, over the years. Pliny calls it the first amongst fabrics which rivals the colour of flowers. You do have to kill a lot of little beetles to get it. And cardinals wear it, and therefore cardinal red is also Kermes, is also grain, is also crimson. Another word for it, so many words, is scarlet. Scarlet is Middle English for any brightly coloured cloth, but if you go back through from the Old French to the medieval Latin to the Persian to the Greek, you end up at the Latin sigillatus, meaning decorated with small images. Therefore, in minium, the colour red becomes a colour for miniature, and in scarlet, a colour for miniature becomes a colour for red. There you go. In a lot of countries, the only people who could wear Kermes dye were very high-ranking people. So in Pistoia, women couldn't wear Kermes at all. In Florence, married women couldn't. In Venice, only the elite could. There's lots of luscious red in Renaissance portraiture, and the deeper the red, the better. Henry VII, upon becoming king, buys 10 yards of crimson velvet for his wife for a dress. Henry VIII says that crimson velvet is only for those above the rank of Knight of the Garter, and has most of his wives painted in red. When Mary Queen of Scots went to her execution, she wore a black satin gown, and when they removed her dress for the execution, she had scarlet satin for her bodice and petticoat, her underwear. And she's even handed a pair of red sleeves to add to that for the complete look that she was going to be executed in bright red. I don't know what symbolism that would have quite meant to the people at the time, except perhaps that it's the Catholic colour of martyrdom, of course, the blood red. But I'm sure it made a great impression on everyone watching. Anne Boleyn similarly had worn a crimson petticoat for her execution. At other times, wearing of crimson is thought to be warming. You would wear scarlet wool because it's thought to literally protect you from the illnesses of cold. When everything is to do with the balance of your humours, scarlet is a hot colour, and therefore wearing scarlet can protect you from a cold. and there became some superstitions attached to that. So you might sew some scarlet flannel into your shirt, or you put scarlet flannel in your pram to keep your baby warm. When Elizabeth I has scarlet fever, they wrap her in scarlet flannel. It's even into the 19th century, there is superstitious use of putting red flannel on babies. And this also leads to why the red coats of the hunt are red coats. Partly it's drawing from military appearance, but also it's because if you're going on a hunt, you want the warmest jacket possible, and red wool is going to be warmer than any other colour of wool. Hence the red coats. There's some more wonderful. So there's a bit of red, and some more of these. Look at me! I am important enough, and I have enough money to be able to have suits made entirely of red. There's your fox hunting and your military.
It is. It is.
But for your fox hunting, yeah, absolutely. This is the Garibaldi blouse. The Garibaldi bodice. This is a red woolen bodice, which is named after the famous red shirts worn by Garibaldi. He apparently always wore red. And this is basically the ancestor, the earliest version of what was going to become a blouse, because it has nods to male fashion and to men's shirts in a way that other women's tops of the time don't. So it has pleats and gathers, and it only comes down to here, extends just below the waist, and has these full sleeves, and yeah, it's basically a blouse. And the first blouses were red, and then white ones come along later, because is it really seemly for women to be wearing all of that red? But the red one comes first. Speaking of revolutions like Garibaldi, we have our red turns up on both sides of the French Revolution with symbolic meaning. The red heels here of the king. The first person we know who had this sort of red heel symbolism was Louis XIV, and he often wore them in his portraits, even when he was in his 60s, and why not? But he bans any non-noble from wearing heels. And they also, even nobles couldn't wear anything higher than his, which were 5 inches in some cases, which is quite a heel. For 5 inches, presumably, that's a stacked heel. I think that might have been including a stacked base as well. Being able to wear them was a perk, a favour that he could bestow or take back. You knew who was popular in court because they were wearing red heels. And this is, crushed beetles and maybe crushing your enemies underfoot. Charles II took the trend to England, which was rather unnecessary, given that even when Louis was in his 5-inch heels, Charles was still taller than him in his bare feet, because Charles was a 6-footer. And yeah, red heels remain popular amongst the nobility and by the king right through until the French Revolution. They are a mark of being very much in with the royalists. On the flip side, the red cap is a sign of being a revolutionary in Paris at the time. The bonnet rouge becomes, yes, a symbol of those most devoted to the cause. When Louis XVI is captured in 1792, they force a red bonnet onto his head as a gesture of having beaten him and the revolution having won. And there is a direct line between that and the red chosen by the USSR and by China as the colour of people's revolt and therefore of communism, and hence the reds under the bed, and so on. It all goes back to the red bonnet of the French Revolution. On the flip side, red is used to mark out the outcast, That's the next one. So it might be used to mark out, and this would be the cheaper madder rather than the expensive kermes. It might be used to mark out prostitutes or lepers. Might have to wear a red hood or a red cap. And that's why it carries on into the Puritan times, that Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel Scarlet Letter plays upon this idea that you might be marked out, and in a world where everyone else is not wearing that sort of bright colour, having a red letter pinned on your chest for adultery will very much stand out. The new kid on the block by that time, and the colour that is used for those red heels and possibly that red cap, is cochineal, which is a different beetle from the kermes beetle. It's the kind of equivalent from the New World, but it is it makes 10 times as much dye. It's much less effort to use cochineal. It's really fade resistant, really bright, and relatively easy to make. So it's absolutely, you know, the thing. It's been really important in Inca culture. This is an Inca garment using it. Mama Oclo, the woman who first helped populate the earth, sort of semi-goddess, first comes from the cave, out of the cave of origin, in a red dress made from cochineal, dyed with cochineal. Again, very popular with painters of the time. Confusingly also called Crimson Lake, just to mess around, because crimson is kermes, but because they're both beetles, people started calling kermes natural crimson and this artificial crimson, even though it isn't artificial, it still comes from a beetle. It's all very, very bad. Cadmium is late on the scene, discovered in 1817 as a byproduct of refining zinc. Again, it is toxic. There are, even from the start, concerns about whether we should be putting it in artists' paints, but it is commercially available from 1910. It's basically another variant on vermilion, and yeah, fortunately they come up with this just at the point that they stop actually trying to mine vermilion at all. Matisse apparently once tried to persuade Renoir that cadmium red was far superior to anything he was already using, and he loaned him a tube of cadmium red, and Renoir, who is a generation older, responded, "It is very irksome to change," and handed the paint back. I'm happy with what I've got, thank you very much. Okay. So that one, you can see, is verging in the direction of orange, and this is why I've taken them kind of together. It's because, you know, when does red become orange and when does orange become yellow? It is a spectrum, after all. The funny thing about orange, of course, is that it is, you know, if red is the first colour word in the language, orange is one of the very last, certainly into English. Until about 1500, the English language could provide with nothing better than yellow-red, or just red, or if it is a sort of yellower colour, it might be called yellow crog, crog being crocus, so saffron colour might be a sort of a version of saffron. This is really obvious when we consider what all of these have in common. Red squirrel, red fox, robin redbreast. This is sometimes called a red-headed duck, and this is a redhead. And when you look at those colours, that's not red, is it? And this is because they're all named back in the time when there was no word orange in English. They could have got red, or, you know, they could have got crog, which would have been...
oh God, imagine the teasing.
Being a croghead.
Bad enough being a redhead.
It would have been a croghead. It's not good.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah. So, you know, the fox in the Nun's Priest's Tale is described as being betwixt yellow and red. They don't have a word. Sometimes saffron is used, or quince is used, but I mean, you could still make the colour. They could dye it madder with the right mordant, and onion with the right mordant, but they don't have a separate word. Everything has to either go to red or go towards yellow. The the orange tree comes from Asia to Europe. Well, that's the other thing. They could have just settled. They could have settled for quince, in which case you could be a quince head. Is that better?
No.
Because that's quince jam there, so that's a good orange colour. So the orange tree comes into Europe from Asia in the 15th century, and along with its name, which is naranj, it took, and so it came in and it was the colour for the fruit, and then eventually that colour, that word transferred to also being for the colour. There is a sort of gap in between those things. So the red kite is first called a red kite after there are oranges in the country, but before the word orange is used for a colour. Red kites aren't really red or orange, they're rusty brown, but never mind. Yes, when it comes in, of course, they don't know how to describe it. What is this fruit? What colour is this fruit? Well, it's not orange. It's an orange, but what colour is it? They call it a golden apple, or say that it is tawny coloured or quince coloured, until eventually they just say, well, it's the colour of an orange, so it's orange coloured. You know, it's a very easy slope to get from the one to the other. The first reference to the colour that is as a colour is in the wardrobe of Elizabeth of York, Henry VII's wife, who buys sleeves of orange sarsenet, which is a very fine fabric. Interestingly, just to confuse this yet further, those orange sarsenet sleeves might not be anything like this colour here, because by the time oranges made it as far as England in the early days, they're going to be quite battered up. They might be more kind of orangey, reddy brown colour, because you know they've already lived a life on board ship. They won't look anything like this. So yeah, we don't really know, and of course that adds to nobody knows what colour anybody else thinks things are. In Midsummer Night's Dream, one of Bottom's stage beards is described as orange tawny. So the colour is shifting there into probably actually meaning the colour of red hair. So it's odd that at some point we didn't start talking about, I suppose ginger is the other word we've moved to, isn't it? The colour of the spice. It becomes more popular after William of Orange takes the throne. So 1688, Glorious Revolution. The funny thing is that William of Orange does not get his name from either the colour or the fruit. It is entirely coincidental that it is the same word. Orange in the noble house of Orange that William of Orange is part of comes from the city of Orange. And the city of Orange is originally Arausio, who is probably a Celtic water god, which is Germanized to Orangia, and then becomes Orenga, and then Orange. So it is a complete coincidence. William of Orange is named after a water god and the city that's from there. However, as it happens, from the bit of the coast where Orange is the route that oranges first started to come into the country. Sheer coincidence. And the family just embraced it and said, yes, we are the House of Orange after our city. And this, of course, leads to Protestant Orange men. Tell Protestant Orange men that the absolute first origin of their name is a Celtic water god. That would not go down well. And of course the popularity of the orange carrot, because this was a mutation version that happened, as you know, it does at various times and places, from the original purple carrot, and because it happened during the reign of William of Orange, some enterprising farmer thought, I can sell these as royal carrots, and the orange carrot grew in popularity from that point onward. So yes, some very odd coincidences going on there. It's not that popular in clothing. You won't find many pictures of people sort of all in orange. It's even when the first synthetic versions, your chrome orange and your cobalt orange, come along, pre-Raphaelites appreciate it in this kind of semi-classical setting, but it is thought too overpowering for most people to wear throughout most of history, and I think there is a point there. In 1855, Godey's Lady's Book says that orange suits nobody. It whitens a brunette, but that is scarcely a desirable effect, and it is ugly. There's someone with opinions right there. In 1879, similarly, the Colour in Dress book says it is to be avoided by the fair blonde. For brunettes, it is too gaudy and brilliant to be used in dress, save in very small proportions. So occasionally it gets used in trim or ribbons, but you won't find historic orange dresses, except in the works of people like Lord Leighton. This is Lord Leighton's Flaming June. Again, it's that hot property of it. This is Monet's Impression Sunrise, which is one of the first really important Impressionist paintings. And that little blob there, that is chrome orange, and this is one of the first uses in painting of chrome orange. And he's using this new paint to really stand out and to say that he's making it look as new and important as possible as part of this new style of painting that embraces these new chemicals for the most part. I think we might have a few minutes off there before we come back to yellow. Although some of the yellows are kind of a bit orangey too. There is no line.
I think
Another one? Do you want a copy now?
not really, do you?
I come on.
Already had your morning coffee there. So
I
there's
don't want-
always time for a second morning coffee.
There could be.
Exactly.
There could be.
I have my lemon juice.
That's not the same glass you were drinking out of earlier. So either you had a spare one sitting there. You drunk more of it than that earlier.
I think so.
I'm sure. I thought what she's drinking looks like barley water.
No, it's just lemon juice in a probably not quite clean glass. Or it's just the way the light's hitting it. No, this is the same one. Maybe my hand was in the way and you think it was.
Maybe thought it was lower than it was. It's magic.
yes, I'm doing accidental magic tricks without even knowing.
There's a. Your father will read it out to you. There's a message we have from WEA, which might be of interest.
Right. Always.
It was 2 or 3 days ago. Seize your summer. New summer courses out now. Book your next course. And so there's a link to see what the summer courses are. There's an interesting photograph of a gentleman with a dog, and he's quoted, "So many tutors have gone the extra mile to make my courses fulfilling." Click the link below to read WEA learners David's experience of studying with us.
We try.
Yeah, indeed. Well,
It is not made easy by, we're already going the extra mile in order to fill in all the forms, and then it's the extra mile to. Yes, I mean, they do have a few courses over summer. which I think they probably didn't much with the face-to-face ones because halls don't tend to hire so much in the summer, but and they assume that people will be, you know, on holiday, but with the Zoom ones they've got a few. But again, Graham didn't even ask.
No. Well,
Graham's
it's
the one-
broken down into subject, arts and crafts, green courses, and history. So they do history courses.
But there's hardly anything there if you look at it. I found it by a different route. I didn't know that that was happening, but I was looking at, you know, what should I be leaping onto, and there are not many history courses, and one of them is a 6-week history of language course, which Olga will tell you is a repeat of something that she did this term out of curiosity, which is
Absolutely terrible.
Yeah, understand.
so that one's running over the summer, but mine isn't.
She managed to make what Joe does in a 3-term course, in a 6-week course, and I learned less in
Yeah.
that 6-week course because I unlearned things because she made it so dull.
It's
Ah,
I don't even know.
But, yeah,
So did you give feedback?
I haven't been asked for feedback yet. It's one of those things, I never know who reads the feedback or even
Yeah.
if they read it, because one time I sent a message saying, please email me at my actual email address to let me know that you have read this, and I've had nothing. It's been tumbleweeds.
Yeah,
So I don't know if they even take the feedback, but
Yeah.
I kind of don't want to be mean to the lady because it's not her
Yeah.
fault, it's dull, but it is her fault she's got this course and Joe hasn't, kind of thing.
Sorry.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not her fault, but it's somebody further
It's
up.
not good.
Olga, is
Yeah.
that Janet Wilson?
Yes.
Oh, bugger. That's one of the ones I've signed up for.
Oh,
But I haven't
Yeah.
paid for it. It was history of advanced writing.
no,
oh,
that's
that's a different course.
Is it the same lady then?
Same lady does
Yeah.
a history of writing as well as history of English.
Okay.
But she's dull and boring.
I am biased. Joe is my best friend. I like Joe's style.
I'm actually rubbish. It's just, you know.
It's an illusion.
I
full
I
of
like Joe's style. I did not like Janet Wilson's style. There is a lot wrong with it. You will get absolutely sick of the phrase "sort of,"
Oh dear.
because she sort of uses the word "sort of" every sort of couple of words.
I use Everyone's got something.
Everyone's got something, but
This
is
is
shorter than
shorter.
sort of.
I found that when I've complained, it worked because I had an art class where it was supposed to be trees through the seasons. And I thought, how lovely.
Yes.
I expected each lesson to be, you know, autumn, winter, different tree. And
Yes.
when we signed in on Zoom, she said, draw a tree and I'll play you some background music, and then went off and made some tea.
No.
And she didn't draw with us or tell us what to draw or give us a picture or anything. And I rang the WEA, complained, and I got my money back.
Excellent.
It sounded so beautiful. I think my expectation was really high because I love trees. And the fact she just said, draw a tree while I play you some music, was a bit of a letdown.
Yes, understand.
Her first name was Abby.
Okay.
Want to avoid there?
Absolutely. She
It
was,
will be
oh,
interesting to see what you think of Janet Wilson's,
Yes.
because, as I say, I'm biased. I like Joe's style. It will
This
be
one
nice
made
to have
it.
somebody
Mm.
give a different point
Yeah.
of view.
People's mileage varies.
it is.
Some people are very popular that I think I don't know why that's popular. So, you know.
Some people could read the telephone directory and be interesting.
Yeah.
And that's what matters, that
Yes.
you're engaged with the person. Even if I've signed up for a course of something I've no interest in whatsoever, but I know the person and I know that it'll be fascinating. So I think that's all that matters. You don't know what you don't know, but some
Precisely.
people have great subjects and they're really poor at expressing it. You know, just lists of facts. I had another one where the lady just sat and read from a piece of paper, and that's cripplingly dull. Yeah,
I'm not just reading from it, to be fair.
No, you
just
add in.
read date after date after date, and we all fell asleep.
Yeah. Well, the thing I found with the course that Janet did, where Joe does the think about, you know, which words do we still use the en for plural, and there's only like 3 or 4, and we're that 3, and we're sitting and we're thinking and we're scratching our brains, and then somebody has the idea, it's children, isn't it, and brethren, and Janet just put them up on the screen.
Here are the 3 words.
Here are the 3 words that still use the en as the plural, like in Germanic. And it's like, no, there's no engagement. That there was nothing interactive.
Right.
Where Joe makes a point of doing something interactive in each session.
And language is the easiest one I've found to make interactive, because everybody has such a wide, you know, knowledge base of the English language to start with. It's easy to get
somebody to overhaul it, don't they?
I thought the WEA were all in favour of that.
Yes.
Interactiveness.
Yes. Well, I will certainly, yeah, I will certainly make a point of, when I do give the feedback, saying there was nothing interactive.
The course overview for this lady says discussions will be readily available after each session.
Oh yeah, bear in mind this was an 1.5-hour session, so there were 6 1.5-hour sessions. She spent the first 20 minutes of each one going over what she did in the previous session, which was unnecessary because they're short sessions, and the last 20 minutes open for questions and discussion. Nobody was engaged, nobody cared, nobody had any questions or wanted to discuss. So there was only about 40 minutes of actual learning.
Input.
In quotes.
Was this recently, Olga?
Yeah, it was over the summer.
I thought she might have improved, but not if it was this year.
Right now, I decided while they were doing the short summer courses, while they were upgrading their system, I would take a couple of courses to see, you know, have an experience of another WEA tutor, a bit of variety. And it turns out that there was another one that I was going to do, but it clashed with another fixed point in my life, as it were. Would have been a Wednesday evening. And that was going to be on another something else that Joe also does a class on. It was ironic, the ones I found, but I can't remember what that was because I didn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, we are encouraged to do recaps, because that's part of the reinforcing learning and making sure that we can tick all the boxes to say that people definitely know the target subjects at the, you know, the target things at the end. But not for 20 minutes.
A 5-minute, you know. Last week we covered this, and this. This week we're going to cover all of this.
We're going back to
get on with it, yeah.
So we should move back to yellow, I believe. Okay. So is everyone ready to dive into some yellow?
Quick one. Has anybody had a course that they've really loved? Because I might bin this one and do one that's better.
Well,
Anybody done one recently that was really good?
But she's not doing any courses this time.
Oh, poo.
Sorry.
Better on writing than language, this woman.
She might. If that is her actual love, she may have been doing that one first.
Oh, she's doing both. She's doing both again. Fortunately, I didn't pick both.
She might have more enthusiasm for the writing, if that's.
Well, I'll let you know.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Please do. I'm curious.
Waiting for that to not be an empty chair in that corner now. They've gone off to make coffee.
Can you mute them?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah, there we go. Should we start without them? Oh, here she comes. Here comes trouble. We were waiting for you. Okay. So let us move on to yellow. Again, one of the early colours to be named in people's, people tend to go dark, light, red, green, and then other things, but yellow is one of the next ones after that. Or people take green and yellow as a single thing that relates to natural, foliage colours. But if you go back to, say, ancient China, yellow is seen as one of the 5 colours in the way that they organise the universe, where we have the classical 4 humours system. They have a 5-element way of organising the universe, and each of the elements has a colour attached, and yellow is earth, as well as being the sun, wealth, health and longevity. Again, sometimes it can only be worn by the imperial family. Back over on this side of the planet, the word yellow goes back to Old English, and goes right back to Proto-Indo-European. The root is yell, which is spelt G-E-L, but the G is pronounced y. So that word yell also is the origin word for gold, which makes sense. If it's originally G-E-L, it's not much of a stretch to get gold from there. So yellow and gold come from the same starting place. And less obviously, the word yell, as in to shout, because the colour yellow is sort of shouting at you. It's about brightness and attention grabbing. So as yellow grabs your attention visually, a yell grabs your attention audibly, which is quite nice. The word lurid means pale yellow. There is a Latin word luridus, which means pale yellow, ghastly, the colour of old bruises.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where lurid starts. Again, there are a lot of pigments and dyes which can turn things yellow, and again, the oldest one really is going back to your ochre shades. You can get yellow ochre as well as red ochre, and again, you get these colours where is it orange, is it brown, is it red, is it yellow, who knows, but that is done with yellow ochre, and that is a rock face of yellow ochre. It is quite yellow. I've now said the word yellow so many times it has lost all meaning already, and we've only just started. The Mesopotamians are using things like pomegranate and sumac to get yellow 4,000 years ago. The Egyptians are using yellow ochre, and they're using orpiment. So here is some Egyptian. I do not know what is going on in that picture. It is possibly best not to ask, because it really does look like a slave is tickling the lady under the chin there. Anyway, so this is orpiment. It's another mineral pigment, which again comes from, if you are a veteran of previous sessions of this type, orpiment again is arsenic based. So we've moved away from our mercury, and instead we're going to play with some arsenic to get that lovely bright yellow. There are lots of plants that do it. Dyers, broom, weld. As I say, weld is incredibly easy to grow and gives a really bright yellow when you dye with it, yeah, is quite dramatic in its effect. So yellow clothes are not hard to come by. The best, of course, are saffron. And there are traces of saffron. If you go to the areas where it grows naturally, it has been found in 50,000-year-old cave art. You tend to think of it as a dye, but apparently it can last on walls as well. There is a fresco at Akrotiri, Santorini, where there are women and monkeys together picking saffron under the guidance of a goddess. I don't know what this says about the nature of their workforce or what they think about women. We'll set the women and the monkeys to that job. It's not ideal, but it isn't necessarily for colour, of course. It can be used for perfume, cosmetics, and food. The Minoans used it for perfume and cosmetics, but also for dyeing these short yellow jackets, which are the Minoan fashion of the time. A lot of Greek priestesses and goddesses wear saffron robes. Demeter and Persephone are often shown. Temptation to say Persephone, still there. And yeah, saffron is from these crocus flowers. It is incredibly delicate. There is a short time of year you can pick the stamens. There is also a short time of day you can pick them. It has to be done in the morning before the sun sort of starts to wilt the flower, but after the dew has evaporated off it. So it's very narrow window, very labour intensive, and therefore very expensive. The Crusaders develop a taste for this stuff. It is made illegal to take it out of the region because the Crusaders keep coming up and nicking all of it. There is a story that it said that people would smuggle saffron dye out of the country, sort of wrapped in rugs and things like that. There is a myth that it reached Britain via a pilgrim who had a crocus bulb hidden under his cap. Probably not true, but it's a lovely image, isn't it? Carrying you. But it does make it into England, and of course it is grown in Essex, as we know, because what town does it grow around?
Saffron Walden.
Absolutely, which was previously called Chipping Walden or Chaping Walden.
Yeah.
By about 1500, it's being grown in enough quantity that the entire town is renamed Saffron Walden. You can tell how much wealth they're getting from it. I don't know if you've ever been to Saffron Walden. It's not a very big place and was quite a small village back then. It's a small village with a massive church. It is a hugely oversized church for the size of the population at the time. And of course, that's because there are some very rich people in that town, and they are spending their money on, patronage to the church, and they build this huge outsized church in Saffron Walden, which is still there. And yes, for about 250 years, in Saffron Walden, there are in autumn this harvest is going on. The blossoms are being picked from sunrise until about 10 or 11 in the morning, and carried by the growers and the labourers, who are known as croakers. I don't know if they croak individually, but they are croakers without the A, C-R-O-K-E, croakers, to Walden for preparation. And you have to pluck the stigma out. You can discard all the rest. And apparently, if you walked around the streets of Saffron Walden in the autumn, the streets were absolutely covered with the saffron petals, this lavender coloured bit. So it's named for the yellow, but if you walked there, the streets were covered in purple petals. Saffron is another colour that gets sort of regulations applied around it, but for a slightly different reason. Henry VII says that the Irish are not allowed to dye their clothes with saffron. It has also made its way into Ireland at about the same time. And this is because it is a symbol in that era of Irish identity, national identity. In the 16th century, Irish warriors would be given a new saffron shirt once a year And at the big feast of the year, usually either Christmas or Easter, they would then, what is described as, go gay at the feast. They're showing off in their lovely new bright yellow shirt. Why they didn't just dye them with weld or something, I'm not sure, but it is known as the saffron shirt. And this was often the most expensive thing that one of these 16th, 17th century Irish warriors owned. Until, of course, Henry VII says, no more of that, because it is a thing of Irish identity. So I'm not sure if it makes any more sense than being named after a Celtic water goddess, but either way, it's not doing entirely well. I would tell you what it's called, but I have no idea how to pronounce it. You can just settle for reading it for yourself. I would not like to attempt that one.
No.
Henry VIII says that female courtiers are not allowed to dye their hair with it, because it also gives a sort of very obviously yellow kind of artificial tinge to hair. But when you ban that, it just means that people wear weld and dye their hair with weld instead, which is actually cheaper but brasher anyway, so it doesn't really work, except in a symbolic sense to the Irish. Henry VIII wears yellow for all of his weddings, so he must be keen on it as a sort of good luck thing. On the day of Catherine the Arrogant's funeral, so this is 3 years after they divorced, so he's already married to Anne, but on the day of her funeral, because she's the one that just is allowed to die naturally, Henry and Anne turn up to the court in matching yellow. It's a colour of celebration for the court. At the time when everyone else is putting on mourning drab shades and sometimes black, they go for bright yellow. We tend to think that everyone's ruff at this period would be in white, and a lot of them are, and certainly a lot of the ones in paintings are. But in the mid-16th century, quite a lot of courtiers actually dye their ruffs, and one of the colours they tend to dye them is yellow. We know about this mostly because of the execution of a lady called Anne Turner in 1615, and her job was adding yellow starch to linen ruffs and cuffs for the court, so that they would have yellow ruffs and cuffs. And she promoted this very much, and because of that, she was known to have contact with apothecaries who could provide the yellow dye stuffs. And there is a poisoning, and she is blamed, and no idea whether she actually did it, but it's one of the chemicals that she would have had access to is used. And the judge orders that she should be hanged wearing yellow ruffs, so that the fashion of yellow ruffs may end in shame and detestation. And the hangman also wears them, and that fashion just dies at that point. You do not want to be wearing that look after that. So yellow also has some weird kind of parallel negative set of connotations at the time. In 15th century Venice, prostitutes have to wear a yellow scarf at all times. They say at all times. I don't know if that's all times in public, because if it's really at all times, that's going to make for some slightly strange encounters with the prostitutes. Nothing but a yellow scarf. Anyway, in Leipzig, they have to wear a yellow cloak trimmed with blue. In Pisa, a yellow headband. Executioners are often drawn in yellow, and so quite often is Judas. So this is Giotto de Bondoni's Kiss of Judas, and Judas is the only one in yellow. There's a sort of betrayal. And the symbolism here is not only about the betrayal, but since he is rejecting Jesus, that makes him very firmly a Jew, because yellow is also seen as a colour of Judaism. The Fourth Lateran Council, 1215, says Jews have to distinguish themselves from non-Jews, and in some areas that, again, is the wearing of yellow patches. I mean, there were 16 years in England from 1271 where 74 where all Jews had to wear a yellow patch on their clothing, for instance. Much later, when the French and sort of 19th century French dodgy novels, risque novels, are generally bound in blue. So, sorry, in yellow. So we might have, you know, that's a very blue subject in the sense of a bit sexy. For the French, it's yellow. Then there is fustic, Dyer's mulberry, from a tree in the mulberry family, which is another one that comes in with continental trade, with intercontinental trade, comes from Brazil and the West Indies, which is very popular for a couple of hundred years, sort of 17th, 18th centuries, because it is a strong colour at a low cost. The other sort of the big thing that it has contributed to history is that you can use it with the right mordant to get khaki. So fustic is the dye that made the First World War khaki uniforms, because it is cheap and easy. And even so, they couldn't keep up in the early days of making enough cloth, so people were wearing other colours. But yes, ultimately a large fustic supply, all of which is having to come in from Brazil, gave us khaki. And as you see, it's a really unusual tree because the actual wood is remarkably yellow. That pigment is there from the start. It's not a chemical change. Another tree from the Americas gives us a rather fun colour. Quercitron. There's a word you don't hear very much in the modern world. Quercitron is a particular shade of yellow. Confusingly, quercitron yellow dye is also sometimes known as Dutch pink. It is neither Dutch nor is it pink, and should also not be confused with another thing that was called Dutch pink, which was actually a helpful way of describing pink with an E at the end, which is actually a shade of green. Sorry.
My head's hurting now.
Yes. So if somebody says something is Dutch pink to you in 1700, they could mean two different things. They could mean quercitron dye, orange yellow, or they could mean pink spelt with an E, which is yellowy green. They do not mean pink. Pink itself is never Dutch. Hope that helps. Maybe a bit. It's weird. So yeah, this is from the bark of this tree, and it's one that's actually patented how to get it out of the bark easily in 1771. There's an act of parliament that gives sort of patent rights and importation rights. He introduces it to printers in 1794. In his manual, they did give things good names back then. Experimental researches concerning the philosophy of permanent colours. Not sure where the philosophy comes in. His patent expires in 1799, at which point all the printers of fabric, because this is a time where calico cotton fabric printed is becoming very, very popular. You can get these cheap cottons with cheap stamp flower designs on them, and a very popular colour for that is this range of quercitron shades, this is a trend that leads to something called drab style. You would not normally associate yellow with drab, of all things, but drab style is printed fabric made only using colours that you can get from quercitron and related barks, which is this range of browns and greens and mustards, and a quite bright yellow in there. because when you mordant question, that's the other colours that you get. And it was a very popular thing for patchwork. You could make drab patchworks, which were not drab at all by our meaning of the word, but yeah, at the time, those colours were known as drab. Bit weird. Another one. There are all these colour words that we've just forgotten because we don't think about where they come from anymore. Gamboge. Gamboge is first imported by the East India Company. It's another one that comes from a tree. And you tap the tree for the sap, and you put the sap into a bamboo cane. And then you put the cane over the fire to get the excess water out. And what you are left with is called a gamboge rod, which can then be transported. It's a lovely sunshiny yellow. Guess what? Very toxic, very light sensitive, dyes all the workers of it bright yellow, because it dyes skin a lot. Very diuretic, very laxative. Again, in the list of jobs you do not want, working with gamboge is in there. And yet you could, until into the 21st century, you could still buy it, gamboge paint, in normal paint ranges. So again, don't lick your brush. I knew the name gamboge from somewhere. It is actually used medicinally as well. It's one of the main ingredients in something like Morrison's vegetable pills, which are a 19th century cure-all that is mostly a laxative. One man is found guilty of manslaughter after he tells Captain Mackenzie to take 35 of Morrison's vegetable pills when all he has is a dodgy knee. Captain Mackenzie dies from taking 35 Morrison's vegetable pills, and the guy is actually found guilty of manslaughter for that piece of terrible medical advice. And yeah, he's not the only one. So yeah, this is not nice stuff. Indian yellow, less bad for you. More of an interesting story about where it comes from. Commonly used in India from sort of the 15th century onward, again as probably the contrast color to that minium in those miniatures. It's known as puri or gogili. The latter is the Indian form of a Persian word for cow earth, which gives us a clue as to where it comes from. It is this it's a bright orange yellow. It has a lot of luminescence. It sort of bounces light back. It resists fading. It sort of brightens in sunlight. It is a popular choice for painting of do I have that? No. Painting these miniatures, these frescoes, colouring the walls of houses. In India there would be houses with very yellow walls, and for dyeing these calico cotton cloths. It comes to Europe looking like this, and these solid balls of mustard coloured powder from the late 17th century. They are known to have a very ammoniac smell. I'm not sure this is something I'd want on the walls of my house, but maybe it fades, and some of the walls are probably made with cow dung in them anyway. So, and these arrive, these yellow lumps, unquestioned, in sealed packages from Calcutta to the London docks, addressed to Messrs. Windsor and Newton and so on. And they are washed, purified, the sort of the greener bit separated from the yellow bit. Nobody in England knew what they were actually made from. But, all those other yellows are coming in that are made from trees, right? Or maybe occasionally minerals. So it's probably one of those. We're fine. But, they do have that ammoniac smell. There were rumours that they contained snake urine or ox bile or camel urine. In 1883, the director of Kew Gardens, explorer, botanist Sir Joseph Hooker, gets curious. What is this stuff really? And he writes to the Indian government saying, you know, there's all these people using this paint. We have no idea what it's made from. This is a bit weird. Can you tell us, please? And he gets a reply back after a few months from a civil servant, T.N. Mukherjee, who says that in Bengal, he has seen a group of cowherds who feed their cattle on a restricted diet of nothing but mango leaves. Mango leaves and water is all these cows are getting. This, of course, makes them very malnourished, very dehydrated, and their urine comes out a very, very bright yellow. And that's what you want, right? So, yeah, this urine, he believes, is collected, boiled to the consistency of a syrup. Can you imagine? And then strained, dried, makes this yellow sediment that's rolled up by hand into balls and packaged off to London. Not long after this, it disappears from the market, even in India, and it's rumoured to be a result of animal cruelty protests because you know it isn't fun for the cows. No such law has ever been found, and I think that's probably not true. Since then, people have tried to get to the bottom of this. There are people that, for a long while after that letter, there were people saying, somebody's pulled your leg, Mr. Hooker, Sir Hooker. You know, it's not really where it comes from. Don't be ridiculous. That's not where bright yellow comes from. Someone's having a laugh at your expense, and the letter is a hoax. But in 2018, they looked again at an early chemical analysis, an early attempt at chemical analysis of this. They looked again at it and confirmed that it is definitely animal in nature, not vegetable or mineral. And this, later analysis said, actually, there is hippuric acid in it, which would very much suggest that it comes from a cow or similar ruminant beastie is involved in the making of it, because hippuric acid is a key marker for that. It is used by Turner, so it's the yellow shade here is made from cowpea. You know Van Gogh's Starry Night? You'll never look at it the same again. I'm sorry. It is a mixture of zinc yellow and Indian yellow. So part of that Starry Night, I'm sorry to say, is cow urine. Finally, I thought I didn't have very much. I thought I had too much material and I'd have to whiz through it. So I've whizzed through it, and now I've only done an hour and a half. Annoying. This is chrome yellow, which is used a lot by Van Gogh and is discovered in 1797. It's they find all the chrome colours at about the same time, that you can use chrome to get a red, an orange, and a yellow. This is the other shade that is used by Van Gogh a lot. It has been suggested that some of his mental health problems come from how much chrome paint he uses, chrome yellow in particular.
Are you sharing a screen, because we can't see it?
Oh, sorry. I thought I was on that one. So we go from that one to that one. So that's a Van Gogh with a lot of the yellow in it. In 1888, he writes, "The sun dazzles me and goes to my head. A sun, a light that I can only call yellow, sulphur yellow, lemon yellow, golden yellow. How lovely yellow is." Yeah, it clearly not quite having all his faculties at this point, and possibly yellow is part of the blame for that. These artificial ones, thankfully taking over from the cow one at least, but the last major yellow to be discovered, invented, Winsor & Newton introduces cadmium yellow at the Great Exhibition. It's a whole new, we have this new colour for you in Crystal Palace in 1851 by the marvellous name of Aurora yellow. even though if you think about an aurora, it doesn't actually have any yellow in it.
No.
So yeah. Yes, like I say, I got enough pages here. I thought it was going to take time, and then I've talked too fast because I do. So yeah, sorry about that. You can go back to whinging if you like, if anyone wants to. But that's the end of that.
Joe, where did chrome yellow come from? What's it made from?
It's another mineral one.
It's a mineral one.
Yeah.
So it's just, oh, right.
So chromium, the element chromium, is involved.
Is it chromium dioxide?
I can't remember. A lot of the yellow and reds are oxides.
Yeah.
So it would make sense. Yeah. And again, like with cadmium, they realise they can lead chromate.
Ah.
Yeah.
That sounds doubly toxic.
Well, yes.
Oh, yes.
So yes, I mean, if you want things that won't do you any harm, you're probably better off sticking with things like weld and saffron.
Onion skin. Do onion skins make a yellow?
Yes, it's not very colour fast, unless you use the right mordant. And the same is kind of true with weld, but the thing with all of these is you can kind of give them a refresh. If someone else is dyeing some new stuff, you can stick your last year's shirt back in, but just a little bit of extra pigment.
Oh yeah.
And that way, your colours can stay nice and bright. We absolutely under consider how bright the clothing of medieval times was. It's just it was only in certain colour ranges. Yellows and pinks and oranges were a lot, because there are so many ways you can do it. Onion skin being one. You need quite a lot of onion skins, mind. I've tried doing small things and keeping my onion skins for a while and then doing. You don't get very much, but if the whole community saves it up and does a big batch of yellow once a year, that would work.
Can you see my nice yellow flower, which I've got just behind me?
Back there, yes.
On my screen. That was, well, I can't get it out of the bowl to bring it across. That was bought at Wilko. I don't know what it's dyed with.
Oh, I dread to think from there. Something very chemical. And the orange one next to it. So yes, I've got the right skirt for the occasion.
Yes, orange as well.
Orange and yellow and red, and got the right flower.
When my mum was little at Sunday school, they used to make, they didn't have chocolate eggs. They used to boil their eggs wrapped in onion skins to make them Easter eggs. But they were real eggs wrapped in onion skin.
And you can do wax resist with that. You sort of paint with wax first.
Yeah, you get a candle and you draw your pattern with the candle.
With a candle, yeah, and then put that in. As long as your water doesn't get hotter than the temperature of melting wax, then yeah.
There was a talk, the WA lectures on 5 o'clock on Thursdays. There was one a few weeks back, and it told you all about vegetable dyes.
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you can, yes, all sorts of things you can get from beetroots and but I mean, yeah, like I say, the commonest ones in England going back to use were madder and weld, and if you want to really push the boat out, woad to get you your blue. With those you can get a lot of things. What you can't get really is very dark, rich dark colours, because there's literally sort of more pigment involved. So black is really hard. Dark brown is really hard. You can do dark brown, but you need a lot of oak chippings and a lot of time to sort of concentrate it down. And surprisingly, green is not a particularly easy colour to get. You do sort of khaki. Actual bright green is difficult until things like arsenic come along, which is why they're so popular. You can't replicate the colour of the trees because chlorophyll isn't a dye.
What do you mean actually by a pigment? Does a pigment come directly from the plant? What's the difference between a dye and a pigment?
Pigment is what you make paint out of. So a pigment is something you use to coat a surface. So you need a pigment and a binder. So the binder, which goes on top of the surface and sticks there, and that colour is on the surface. Whereas a dye is something that actually goes into the fibre of what you're dealing with. So, like a hair dye actually goes inside the strands, whereas a hair paint would just be, sitting on top of the hair strands. Some chemicals, a lot of chemicals are one but not the other. So you can't paint with weld, but it makes a really bright dye once it's in there and settled. But as far as I know, there is no weld paint out there. And conversely, some things are good dyes, so good pigments, because they're in a medium that just sticks them to a surface, but you can't get them inside the surface to dye it, if that makes sense. So some are one, some are the other, some are both. Some can be converted from the one to the other with chemical processes. Some, if you try that, it just doesn't work. So yes, when you're looking at colours, you actually almost have to treat those as completely separate areas. So minium, for instance, red lead, excellent pigment for paint. You can't go around in minium clothes, possibly because it can't get small enough to go in to be a dye.
Yes, I was wondering that.
Too large a molecule.
Well, that's interesting. I've never known the difference.
There you go. Learn something every day.
Yeah, especially here.
You learn many things which are of very little use nor ornament.
That's some of the best stuff, though.
But they're fun, yeah.
Yeah.
Keep the brains going and make us think about people in different times, in different ways.
Yeah.
That's all we try for. So yeah, next week will be Newton, which is the talk that I came up with very recently, because the Explore, the local group that I also separately do a few talks for each term, asked me and a chap called Sam to do a combined talk, because he's a physicist. The idea was that I would do the sort of history context and he would do the physics. He didn't do quite what I expected him to do, so I'm not 100% sure that it quite worked, but it was interesting, and I definitely learned an awful lot about Newton. And so I can now, do that in other times and places as well. And yes, very much about the human, because I don't think we think about that very much. We just, we know him as this genius. We know him as maybe slightly bonkers. We might know that he was also an alchemist and believer in lots of things we wouldn't think of as science anymore, but were still part of natural philosophy back then. But yeah, knowing his eating habits and what he considered sinful, and what he spent his money on is a quite different kettle of fish.
Not just apples, I'm assuming.
Well, do you know what? He would have been happy with anything. I mean, I don't like doing the diagnosing people in the past with different neurodiverse problems, but he's got something. If
He's on the spectrum well and truly.
He doesn't have autism spectrum disorder. I've been very a lot of his habits turn out to fit that particular pattern of behaviours very nicely. So yeah, he'd probably been happy on just apples if they were just put in front of him at regular intervals. It'd been fine. So yes, I hope you can all make it to that one.
And if you can't and want to find out about it, drop me a line and I can send you the YouTube link once Joe's put it up on YouTube.
Yes, Olga does the little bit of editing of the files, and I put them up on YouTube, but under private, which means you need the link to get to them, and then you can always ask for the link. So yeah, any more colour questions before we move completely away from colour? So we've gone around through green and brown.
I don't know how you do it.
mummy brown at least,
Mhm.
yellow, red, orange. I completely forgot.
We did Movine and Friends.
Pink and purple. Yeah. So the stuff.
One question, Joe, is what did they use as a mordant early on when they first started to have colours?
Yeah.
What would have been a mordant for them?
Easiest thing, and mordanting was probably discovered accidentally, because for a lot of dyes, iron is a mordant, and a lot of your cooking is done in, and a lot of your dye work is done in iron pots. So they probably discovered mordanting accidentally by using iron pots. And that obviously gives you one particular set of additional colours. Iron is usually said to sadden a colour, which means making it a bit duller and darker. So for instance, saddened weld is a sort of khaki green. So it's called saddened because it just becomes this duller, darker colour. So yes, that's probably the first one. The most used one in the Middle Ages and on from there is alum. And there's a story behind that, because there was a good trade with for alum in medieval times, and alum changes the colour without making it as dull, and also keeps it nice and colour fast, so it's really good. And the place that alum is most readily available is somewhere near Rome. It's in the Papal States at the time, and when we were a Catholic country, we had excellent trade with the Papal States for alum. We bought lots of their alum. Unfortunately, after the English Reformation, formation of the Church of England, the Papal States refused to trade with us for alum, and we didn't know where else to get it. So if you actually compare, if you were to walk into the streets of like 1450 and 1550, maybe a little later because it would take a while for the effect to wear through, so 1480 and 1580, you would find the streets of 1580 had a much more limited and duller colour palette available in their clothing. And that is entirely because we had no source of alum. So instead we were saddening things, because that was the other obvious choice. So there were fewer different bright colours out there. And that particular problem lasted about 100 years, until a source of alum was discovered in this country, and it was discovered near Whitby. And the only reason I know about this in detail is because 18 months or so ago, Olga and I went down to Whitby, and then we had enough of the steampunk, thought we'd go for a walk, and just went up along the coast just north of Whitby, where all the alum mining used to happen. And it looks like an alien landscape in places. You could film Doctor Who there, because there's just these sort of expanses. So it's sort of down off a cliff, and some of it is that the cliff and the quarrying bit is now overgrown, but then there's this bit leading up to the sea that I think might be too toxic for anything to grow there now. But yeah, it's just this wasteland. And yes, there's all sorts of stuff about the process, because you need to boil it in great big vats, and you need to leave it burning for weeks, I think. So they had these big mounds of alum that were just smouldering away inside, and just giving off this horrible, horrible smoke. And yeah, this was a big industry in just north of Whitby in the 18th century, late 17th.
There's a place called Alum Rock, I think, in the Isle of Wight, isn't there?
Oh, is there?
I think so, yeah.
Maybe that's another place that they found it and were able to get
Burn it off.
And I think probably you'd want to burn it off near the sea, because, sea breeze, take all that away, please. So yes, if you happen to be in the vicinity of, let's see if I can get a picture of it. Well, I mean, Olga, may I use your profile picture there?
Of course you may.
Way to show a little bit of, because I can't remember the name of the actual place, but I can do that. So
That's near Whitby.
Yes.
That's just a few miles north of Whitby.
I knew about it, but I didn't know what it looked like.
It's a blasted landscape. It's
Yeah.
absolutely amazing.
And stuff.
It is.
Distance.
Yeah, that's the sea.
But there are these whole sections that just look like this, and then just to the left of that, it starts rising, and it's sort of very lumpy where the cliffs show where these mounds of alum were, and then where the quarrying is actually happening. And there's a spot where there's a couple of buildings, a couple of ruins that were part of the alum works, but very little survives of the buildings. Possibly because, you know, people wanted to forget about that, or they weren't very well built. I'm not sure, but yes, if you want to go experience an alien landscape and you live in North Yorkshire, I recommend. I can't remember what the area is called off the top of my head. Let's have a look. Alum Industry of North East Yorkshire. There we go. So that's what it looked like originally. Big troughs full of the stuff. And the other thing that I remember about it is that for the process of making it, you need huge quantities of ammonia, and they tended to use human urine, and they were making it in such big quantities that the population of the Whitby area was not providing enough urine. So they actually sent ships up to Newcastle. And so the story is, and I've never found any local information of this, but it would make sense, that there were actually sort of buckets on street corners collecting, or taking the piss, one might say.
I was going to say, does that mean they were taking the piss out of the Geordies?
They were. And
literally.
apparently they liked the urine from Tyneside particularly, because they were all beer drinkers rather than drinkers of anything else, and heavy beer drinking apparently produced I don't know, it might just have been more dehydrated, already more concentrated, so you get more chemical for your buck, as it were. But they reckoned that the best urine came from Geordieland, and there were these massive ships that took down gallons and gallons and gallons of urine down the coast to Whitby.
They used urine in laundry, didn't they?
Oh yeah, it's useful for all sorts of things. The Romans definitely had big collection barrels around the place.
Yeah, you should be asked to sort of pee in a bucket.
What did you use it for in Stamford?
You can
there
use
was
it
a TV programme about it, but it might have been a local opt-out in the past couple of years, I think. I remember watching it, but it could have been a North Yorkshire opt-out thing. But it might be somewhere.
I seem to remember one of those jobs you don't want in history things with Tony Robinson.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Longer ago in the past, and he was in a vat of
Worst
urine.
jobs in history. Well, I have that book just over there, so I'll have to check.
It can't have done your feet any good. He was like treading grapes, but treading on cloth in a big vat.
I mean, a lot of recipes at the time include it. There are some actual, beneficial chemicals in there. It's a nice sort of, but whether you'd want to be in it for a long period of time is a different matter.
Well, personally speaking,
yes, whether you'd want to, it's a different matter from, whether it would do your skin any good. But I mean, there are medical remedies. There's a thing called puppy water that Pepys's wife becomes very fond of as a skin skin toner, and there's a couple of mentions in Pepys's diaries about how his wife has gone crazy for this puppy water stuff. Now, there are two possible things that could be puppy water. One of them involves boiling a puppy. So I'm going to go for the other one. They're both valid meanings at the time. The other one is puppy water.
Slightly better than the alternative. Only slightly.
for the puppy at least.
Definitely. Much better for the puppy.
That's another example of what you can do with urine at the time. Were you saying
That's-
in Stamford for something?
Yes, in Stamford, they used to collect it, street corners and door to door. And we think it was possibly to do with the production of wool, wool
Yes.
trade.
I think it's, is it used in fulling?
Mm.
I think it might be
Yeah,
used in.
rings a bell. I've heard that somewhere.
Basically,
Yeah.
it's the easiest way of getting hold of ammonia.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly useful chemical in all sorts of things. So, you know, in fact, I read a thing recently about how we should do that again. How much potentially useful chemistry we flush down the loo every day, because people are that much removed from our bodily processes these days. We're not going, I'm not collecting that and sending it to someone, or, you know, door-to-door collection or whatever. But in terms of the nitrates and yeah, other chemicals that could be put to work in the chemical industry more cheaply and easily than digging them up from scratch or making them in factories, we actually waste a lot of chemicals.
Not to mention all that water we use.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Getting rid of
Then
it
we
as
have to
well.
pay to have it processed, don't we?
Yeah.
So if instead
Mine-
we peed into sealed containers and then dropped them off at a depot or something, it would actually be good news all
We could have
around.
a curbside collection like you're recycling.
Yes.
Out every week.
You'd have to think quite hard about what kind of containers you were using, and
Like milk
Yeah, we
churn.
want the dog knocking it over. Yeah.
potentially there is a very green activity that could be done there.
Perhaps we'll just go back to having buckets on the corner of the street.
Yes.
Mm.
Draw the line there. I mean, buckets
And
with
drinking
a
beer.
sealed lid, maybe, on the street we could go with. Although, yeah, how many people would just use them in the street? I don't know.
Yeah.
Imagine how much you could collect just at Glastonbury, right?
Oh,
All you need,
Imagine what would be in it.
you'd have to say to people, this is for urine only. Maybe even, you know, just make it for men, make it a urinal. And have urinals at Glastonbury, which just connect into a big tank,
Yeah.
right? And then that big tank could be used for so much, you know, so much chemistry could be processed out from that and used in industry instead of us getting hold of those things from other places.
and they could recycle all the drugs, couldn't they?
I agree with you. Most of the men would have been on pot for it.
Filter everything out.
Yes, but while they're separating out the chemicals, they can also separate out the ecstasy and
The additional drugs, exactly.
well, you said then you get hold of that and remake it and resell it.
Exactly. Yeah, precisely so.
If you're willing to, how fussy are you with your drugs? If you're willing to have this, it's no different from astronauts, you know, regenerating their urine.
No.
I believe the current space station does not regenerate it into drinking water. It regenerates it into water for everything else.
Yes.
Not because it isn't drinkable, but because of the optics of them doing it. They use it for water for all the for cleaning. So
I think we've just discussed several more talks for you to do.
well, yes, that's
And 2 or 3 inventions.
that is what happens. Yeah, so like I say, Newton next week. I've got very little on over the summer at the moment, so there's a good chance I can come up with something each week or certainly each fortnight for a while. So yes, as long as you're all enjoying it, I will keep.
Yeah.
Yes, then I want to go. I mentioned it before. I'd like to go back and see the other colours that I had to miss.
Well, they will be all. In fact, I think they might already be.
I've said I will send the links across.
And I'll send money.
That would be good. Yes,
Thank you.
And the other thing I was going to say is, you know, tell your friends. All of you are weird, interesting people. I bet you have friends who are weird, interesting people.
Weird, certainly. Yeah.
It's worth considering.
And if you do invite your friends, if they are interested, get them to send their email addresses to me. I'll add them to the list so that they can join in.
She'll take over the world.
Who needs a WEA? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Better
Exactly.
than the alternatives.
Well, you see, yes.
That'd be
Keep
good.
me from having to get a proper job. Okay.
Bye
well,
then.
nearly made our
Thank
way
you
through.
all.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, it's been